Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and today we're going to take a look at how to create a radial menu, just like this one here, that we can interact with, and I can use this to, for example, interact with these different objects in our scene, turn them on and off. Very simply, but obviously you could use your radial menu to do any kind of function that you could possibly want in your game. So let's go ahead and get things going in Unity. Okay, so here in Unity, I've got a very basic setup going on. We've got our little objects here that we're going to use that we saw a moment ago could be turned on and off with our menu. If you want to download this starting project, there'll be a link in the description down below to follow along with this, but you can also just make it yourself. It's very simple and straightforward. So I've got the four of these guys here. I've also got a script on a canvas here that has a reference to them that will allow me to, if I play the game here, I can use my keyboard to turn these on and off. So you can see I can make them all pop on and off like that, or switch. So those are the functions that our menu is going to do. If I stop this running here, I've also got a very simple little radial menu set up. So if I switch to 2D view here and double click on it, it's basically just a circle in the background. I've got some lines breaking it up. So I've got these divider lines. I can turn them on or off. They're not necessary, they're just there to make things a bit more obvious. And I've got 5 bits of text here that I'm going to change the color of depending on which area we're in. I've also got a little segment piece that we'll return back to later, which is essentially just a circle inside of 2 square masks that allows it to look like a segment like this. If you want to see how that works, again, take a look at the project files. It's very simple. It's not too complicated. But we've got those basic setups. As I said, we've got the ability to turn those objects on and off. If I play the game here without this menu turned on, I've also got the ability to turn that menu on by hitting the tab, which activates this menu. But of course, at the moment, this menu doesn't do anything. We can't click on anything. We can't do anything that we want to. Now, you might be thinking, oh, well, I could just make these a button or something like that. But these buttons are would actually all overlap with each other. That's why you can't just use a simple button images or anything like that. We need to make some code that will allow us to interact as a radial menu. So, as I said, I've got a radial menu script laid out. Let's take a look at what I have in here. Again, nothing complicated. It's literally just those functions that I mentioned a moment ago. We've got something that will turn the menu on. We've got this, which takes input here to activate some functions, which make those objects turn on and off. And here are the functions that will switch those objects all on and off. So we don't need to worry too much about these. Those are the functions you want your menu to do. We're more interested in making this menu work. So I'm going to comment these out so they no longer actually do anything. That was just to demonstrate what will happen with those. And then up here, we're going to start adding some code. So the first thing we want to do is, obviously, to work in our radial menu, we only want to be able to do stuff when the menu itself is active. So we're going to say if the menu dot active in hierarchy. The next thing we're going to need to do is get some input to find out where the mouse is on the screen. So we want to know, if I have my menu active here, just for us to talk about it. So if we have our mouse here, we want to know where's our mouse on the screen and in what segment of our menu should it be. So for that, we're going to go back in here. At the very top, I'm going to add a variable that we'll use to keep track of the mouse's position. So we're here going to say move input, or sorry, not move input. We're going to create a public vector2 that will call move input, like so. And then when the menu is active, we're going to start getting that input. And what we're going to do is set the X and Y values depending on where the mouse is on the screen. So we're going to say move input dot X equals input dot get mouse, sorry, not get mouse position, just mouse position, sorry. Input dot mouse position dot X, so that gets us the X value. And then move input dot Y will be, you might have guessed, input dot mouse position dot Y. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm just going to debug.log this out so we can see what this gives us, because we're going to have to make a little change to this as well. So we're going to debug.log the move input. So we'll save that. Let's go back in to Unity, let it compile, and we'll play. And you can see, because the radial menu is active, if we look down here in the corner, you can see where the mouse is on the screen. So we've got the Y value going up and down and the X value going left and right. So that's all fine, but we know that the center of our radial menu should be in the center of the screen. So what we really want to know is, where is the mouse relative to the center of the screen? Because we want to know, hey, is the mouse over here or is it over here? So we could calculate that by getting the center of the screen and taking it away in a new vector object. Or if we go back to our script, what we can do is, when we're setting the X value, we're just going to say, take away the screen width, so screen.width, so that's the resolution of our screen, and divide that by 2. So we're basically saying, take away half the width of the screen. So we'll do the same for our y-axis, and we'll see then what that does. So screen dot height divided by 2f, like so. So we'll save this, jump back in. What does this do? We should see when we play. Now when I'm at the center of the screen, it should be, well, if I can't get exactly at the center, but I'm close enough there. If we're looking at our console in the bottom corner, we can see, yeah, we're roughly in that area. If I go over here, we're now going to halfway across and halfway and so on. So we're getting the middle of our screen the correct way we want to. Okay, so perfect, we can stop that. And for this to work, when we want to get the angle, we want to get an angle so we're able to locate where we are within this circular area. For that to work, we actually want to make sure that this number goes between 0 and 1. We don't want to get a huge, big, massive 900 something number. So what we're going to do is, where we have our move input here, we're just going to say move input dot normalize. And if we save that and jump back into Unity, we should see now, once that compiles, now our numbers, no matter where we are, it only goes up to a 1, but it's still giving us a number relative to the position of this relative to 0. So if I was to go roughly out on a kind of 45-degree angle-ish, that would give us the same number, you can see. But if I move up and down, it changes around as we go. Okay, so let's jump back into our script. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of that debug for now, like so. The next thing we're going to do is, with our menu active, we want to get an angle that we can use to work out where we are on our radial menu. So for that, there's one important thing to say, which is we need to make sure we're not actually specifically at 0, 0, because if we're right in the center, we can't calculate where we should be on the radial menu. So we're here just going to say if our move input is not equal to vector2 dot 0. And if we're not equal to that, then we need to calculate the angle that we're going to use. So we're going to create a new float that we'll call angle. And that's going to be a math formula. So a math f that we're going to use a tan 2. And this is going to take in two values, a y value and an x value. And so we're going to use our move input values. So we're going to use move input dot y. And we're going to use minus move input dot x. So these are just this is the function that we use to calculate the angle that we have on of where our mouse is on our screen. So let's save this and see this in action. If we go back in here, oh actually sorry, we can't see it in action unless we debug it. So let's debug the angle out. So we're just going to write debug.log angle so we can see the angle that we're creating. We'll go back in here. And if I play this now, we should see over here, we've got an angle value. So if we're all the way on the left, it essentially goes to 0. As we wind around, it goes up to a number value that you should recognize is going to 3.1 something, something, something. So it's going up to the pi number. So we're going up to pi by going to here. And then once we get to the other side, it switches to a minus value and it goes all the way back to 0 over here. So we are making some progress with our numbers here. So let's go back in here. So if we know that this number is pi, let's simplify this by dividing by mathf.pi, like so. So now if we go back in, once that compiles, we play. And now you see the numbers go between 0 and 1 over here. So we're going up towards 1. Let's make it look more like an actual number angle. So we're going to take that angle value. So we'll say angle, and we're going to multiply that by 180. So now it'll look more like some degrees of a circle for us to make things a little bit more simple. You don't need to do all these steps of using the mat and the angle and stuff like that. It just makes things a lot more simple for coding and reading what we're doing. So we're starting at 0-ish over here, going all the way around to 180, and then it switches to minus 180 down here. So let's also fix that. So rather than it switching over to minus 180 and going back towards 0, let's say here, if our angle is less than 0, then add on 360. So we're going to say angle plus equals 360. And that will give us, if I save this and go back in here, when we play, starting over here, we go all the way around, we go up to 180, and we'll keep going all the way around up to 360. So perfect. We now have a full circle being red, so we're able to get the gaps between them, but also at the moment, 0 is starting over here. So if 0 is over here, that's not really great. We don't want to do that, because if you look at how our radial menu is set up here, we've got 0 starting downwards. So what's the difference between 0 here and the value here? Well, if we were to take away 90 degrees from this, because this is a 90-degree angle away, then we could say that 0 was starting here. So let's go back again. And in here, before we set the angle and add on 360, we're just going to say here, angle, what we actually do is add on, so angle plus equals 90f. So we'll save this. We'll go back in here again. And if we compile that and let it play, now down the bottom here is 0. And as we go all the way around, we go around to 360. So perfect. We now have our radial menu allowing us to know where we are within these segments relative to our mouse. Okay, so with that done then, let's stop this. Now we actually need to start making it so that we can change which text is being highlighted as our mouse moves around. So obviously for that, we're going to need a reference to all these various different bits of text. So let's go back in here. At the top, we're going to add, I have already included unityengine.ui up here, so you need to make sure you're using that. And then below that here, we're going to write public text element, and we're going to create an array that we'll call options. So these are going to be our text options that are displaying. And we're going to create two colors here. We're going to create public color. First one we're going to create is normal color, and the second one will be highlighted color. Okay, so we'll save this. Let's jump back into Unity and set this up before we go anywhere else. So I'm going to go over here, and I have my script is attached to my canvas here. Then for options, I'm going to drag them in the order that they'll appear in our radial. So we'll start it at the bottom, which will be our yellow text. So yellow will go in first, then red. So I'll drag red in here. Then all, so all. Then green. Didn't mean to that. Green, like so, and then finally blue. So it's important that we make sure that they go in the correct order as it should go around. Then we're going to set some color. So our normal color will be white. I'm going to make sure I increase the alpha value here. And our highlight color, let's go with a nice kind of blue color for now. Oh, and also need to make sure I put the alpha value up. There we go. Okay, so we've got our colors showing, or our colors set. We have a reference to all these objects. How can we then determine which one we should highlight as we move around? Well, let's go back to our script. And down here, when we have our angle all calculated, I'm going to create a for loop here, and we're going to check which section we're in as we go. So I'm going to create a for loop, for started int I equals 0. As long as I is less than the number of options that we have, so options dot length, then I plus plus. And then in here, we're going to check and see if we are in the angle area. So starting at 0, we know if we go back in here, and if I just play this here, we want to determine if we're in this area here. So we'll start at 0 would be the starting point, and then anywhere over here, if I hover my mouse, you can see it goes to, I have 71.4 there, so we're looking at roughly 70 something here. How can we know what this angle is? Well, it's essentially just the 360 degrees divided by our 5 segments. So if I just quickly throw up a calculator here, or you could do it in your head, whatever, 360 divided by 5 is 72. So we know that each one of these segments should have an angle of 72 within them. So what we can do is, back in here, we want to check is if the angle that we are at, first of all, is greater than, well, for the first segment, it should be 0. We want it to be greater than 0, but less than 72. For the second segment, will be greater than 72, but less than 144, and so on and so on. So in here, we can say our angle is greater than the I value, which will be 0, multiplied by 72. Because the first time it'll be 0, the second time it'll be 72, the third time it'll be 144, and so on and so forth. So we want to make sure it's greater than that, and the angle is less than I plus 1, because we want to go to the next edge, multiplied by 72. So this allows us to check, are we within, which segment are we within? So let's just to verify this, let's say debug.log, and we're going to say the segment name plus I. And I'm going to just comment this one out, save this, just to make sure we can see what's actually happening. And we'll let this, oh, I'll stop this running and play it again, just to make sure there's no issues. And now you can see, there we go, we're in segment 0, segment 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're showing all of these segments correctly. So with that in mind then, now that we know we're getting the correct segments, let's change the color of the text that we have. So we have our options text array, options at position I dot color equals the highlighted color. And then I'm going to say else here, because if we're not on the highlighted one, we want to make sure that the color of all the rest of them stay at the normal color. So options I dot color equals normal color. Okay, so we'll save and we'll go back in here. And again, now once it compiles and I play, we should see as I move around, each element of text gets highlighted. So perfect. That's working exactly the way we want to. Now that we know we can do that, we're going to create a value that will allow us to store which is the selected option at the moment. So I'm going to go back up the top here, and I'm going to create a public int that we'll call selected option. And then down here, when we highlight the correct color, we'll also say our selected option is equal to whatever I is. So that allows us to get the correct segment at this point. And now that we know what the correct segment is, we obviously want to do our functions when we have the correct segment highlighted. So what we're going to do is say, when I play here, if I do this, if I'm highlighting each one, if I click on green, we want this to obviously close this menu, but also make that green object from our scene. If I zoom back in here, we want to make this green object disappear. So as I said before, I have these functions set up for switching between these different elements. So what I'm going to do is up here, if the menu is active and after we've calculated all this movement stuff, I'm going to do a check here to see if the mouse is clicked. So if input dot get mouse button down 0, so we're left clicking with the mouse basically. Well, we know we want to turn off the menu, so I'm going to just quickly say the menu dot set active false. But before we turn off the menu, we want to do whatever option is currently selected. So I'm going to use a switch statement. So I'm going to say switch using the selected option variable. And we just need to go through the 5 different cases that we can have. So I'm going to have case 0 to start off with. And I'm just going to type break here. And just to make this easier, I'm just going to copy this a couple of times. So that'll be 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's just quickly case 1, case 2, case 3, and case 4. So if we jump back in, we know that the first case should be the yellow option. So I'm going to first of all call the switch yellow function that I have. So that'll switch our yellow on and off. Jump back in. Second one will be red. So this will be switch red. I know the third one is all, so switch all. Then we have switch green, I'm fairly sure. Let's just double check. Yes, green. And then switch blue. So save that. Then let's go back in here. Once that's compiled, we should now see when I play, we have our menu active. So if we hover over any of these, if I hit the red one, there we go, it makes our red object disappear. If I press tab, I can click the red again to make it reappear, or I can turn any of these off, like so. So now our radial menu is all fully functioning. That's exactly what we wanted to do. The final thing we'll do here is just to show how we could highlight things a little bit better. So I mentioned that I have this segment piece here. As I said, this is simply just a bunch of different masks here. I could turn these off and you'll see if I turn off that mask graphic, you can see this is actually squaring off that area. And if I turn off this one, if I turn off this one, there we go. It's actually just a whole big massive circle. We've got a square being chopped out here and another little rotated square being chopped off there. So that's all it is, very simple. Not that that really matters too much. So we've got our segment here. So this segment is now showing. What I'm going to do is basically just rotate this segment to whatever angle we want to use for our highlighted radial menu area. So let's jump back into our script. Obviously, we're going to need a reference to that. So up the top up here, I'm going to say public game object. Let's call it the highlight block. Relatively simple. And then all we're going to do is down here, when we have our options being selected here, we're just going to say our highlight block dot transform dot rotation equals a new quaternion dot Euler. Just to keep it nice and simple, because we don't want to dive into quaternion maths at the moment. We're just going to make it 0 on the x, 0 on the y, and we want to rotate it on the y-axis. How we want to rotate it is using the I value, and we want to get the angle. So you might think we'd multiply it by 72, because we know that's the difference between them. And that's almost right, but we'll see what or how that's wrong in a second. So let me just save this. Sorry, I selected the whole thing by accident. Save that, jump back in here. Once that compiles, let's just first of all pop this in here. And if I press play now, you can see when I go to highlight over them, it is moving, but it's moving completely the wrong way. Where it's essentially, it's working okay for this guy here, because that's at the 0 angle that we wanted. But if we start going to any of the other ones, it's going the wrong way. So if it's going the wrong way, it's pretty obvious that instead of multiplying this by 72, we should multiply it by minus 72. So we'll save that, jump back in here, let it play, and we can now go through all of these options. And we now have a fully functioning radial menu. And this starts to this system works well because this can be used for any amount of objects that you have in a radial menu. It's not just, it doesn't matter that this is 5 here. If you had 6 objects, all you would do is say, instead of multiplying it by 72, you would say multiply it by 360 divided by 6, which is obviously 60. Or if you had 7 or 8, it's just 360 divided by that number. So you could, instead of writing the number here, you could simply say 360 divided by 5 here. And that would get you the same result. So I'm going to just demonstrate that. If I say 360 divided by 5 for both of these, if we go back in here now, and if I play, this will work the exact same. There'll be no difference here. So you can simply have however many segments you can have them all being here. So in that way, you could also make a menu that could be reprogrammable as you go. You could make these move around and stuff like that. But there you go. That's how we create a very simple, but also incredibly functional radial menu in Unity. I hope it comes in a lot of use for your games. And if you do use it, make sure and share it here on YouTube or on Twitter @GamesPlusJames to make sure that I can see it and I can share it with everybody else too. So thanks for watching. I'll be back soon with more tutorial goodness. In the meantime, make sure you hit the subscribe and like buttons to share this video around and help everybody learn more about making games. I'll be back soon with more tutorial goodness, and in the meantime, keep being awesome.